Thank you.
Yes, you are.
The recording is in progress. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Victor Sibeko. I am the convener of the Africa Brand Summit and your host for this afternoon. And we've been running this for quite a number of years now, and we're still standing. One of those young last men standing. So we're still standing. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar titled Media in Africa. But before we get to that, I just want to share the few ground rules, ladies and gentlemen. I take it that most of you are in this space, and this has become our life, where we have meetings online. So the rules are very straightforward and the same that applies everywhere else. Keep your mics muted, and given a chance, if you've got a good connectivity, you can have your camera on, but if it is challenging you, you are welcome to switch it off. But when you want to say something, there are certain gadgets there you can play around with. You can raise your hand, and if you do raise your hand and you are recognized, we ask you to introduce yourself and then pose a question. The way we'll run this, we will go through the speakers. We'll have round one, where we just get to know the speakers, and they just they give us a breather on how they feel about the topic, and thereafter we will then zoom into answer the questions that we've posed about the role of the media in Africa and what it takes. My name is Victor Sibeko. I'm the convener of the Africa Brand Summit. Africa Brand Summit has been running for the past 4 years. It was founded by Mr. Soli Mueng, who was once a president of PRISA, which makes me one as well. Once a president, always a president. We refer to each other as President Mueng, the founder and the man behind the vision of having an Africa Brand Summit, mainly to discuss things that people are afraid to tackle. And we call a spade, not a big spoon for turning the soul upside down. President Mueng, welcome and good afternoon. We've just started.
Thank you, President. Yes. So I see this President Matseba there as well.
Yes, and there's a new.
He's just about to fly to a place far away.
Far away. We won't say where. Okay, and we also have President, the new president of PRISA, President Puti Mutambo.
There you go.
Yeah. So what we do, ladies and gentlemen, we run these monthly webinars, and they then culminate into an annual event where we tackle very topical issues. We don't shy away from tackling any issues that has to do with shaping our continent. We're not only confined to South Africa, but we are, as the name prescribe, Africa Brand Summit. Today, we're talking about media in Africa. And to take us through this topic, we've got a number of guests, which we highly appreciate for making time to be with us this afternoon. We have President Tsepo Matseba, who will be flying away, as President Mueng mentioned, and we would like to we will start with him. But before we get started, please just allow me to welcome these guests that are coming in big numbers. So when we talk about media, ladies and gentlemen, we talk about something that is very important. It's how we live our lives, how we expect to see tomorrow, how we expect to see today unfolding is based around what we are told and what is happening in and around us. So if media is not doing its job and it's not meeting what it's supposed to, it becomes a problem. But the biggest issue with media is who exactly is running the media. But we'll get all those questions answered. Just a brief background on where we come from with media. We've seen how media has expanded in Africa, and this has happened because of very good development of the telecommunication infrastructure, especially in the mobile space, where the connectivity is just improving every day. Then we've got cell phones. Then we've got the state-of-the-art computers that we use. And we also have people that have won the media awards, both in television and in print in Africa. So how is it then that our media should be subjected to some things that are untoward or some things that we are not happy with? So ideally what we need to talk about today is looking at the history of the media in Africa, dating back into 1794. I'm told President Mweng that the first printing arrived in Africa. It was delivered in Freetown in Sierra Leone, but it was destroyed by the French before they could even start using it. And later on, around the 1800, the newspaper in the Sierra Leone began printing. Now, does this mean that the people who bring in the printing machines expect us to comply with what they're doing? And that means whoever has got mullah is the one that can run the media and do as they please. So we want to get all those questions answered today, because given the history, and the question is that why then Africans are unable to communicate? Why then sometimes we do communicate, but we are not heard? Why then do we allow the West or people from outside to be the one that tell our stories? We are so capable of telling our stories, and we can do it so well. Now, having looked at the background and the state of the media in Africa and the things that don't make us really comfortable from here and there, I would like to open the platform by inviting somebody that needs no introduction. And this is Mr. President Tsepo Matseba, who is a reputation brand specialist. And I would like him to just briefly give us an overview as to how is Africa viewed in the face of the world in terms of communication. Are we bold enough? Are we strong enough? Are we confident enough? Do we communicate what needs to be communicated? Or we still take a back seat and wait for the West or anyone else to tell our stories when we can do it ourselves? President Matseba.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you, Victor, for that introduction. I think there are probably a few dimensions that I would like to touch on the subject. Firstly, that the media itself cannot always 100% be held accountable for Africa's failure to communicate effectively. So when African leaders don't coordinate their messaging, when they don't communicate strategically and consistently, I think we can't blame the media for the agenda that we see playing out both here locally in Africa, but the one that we see around the world. Additionally, while the international titles, major international titles such as, and I can mention CNN, such as Fox and others, while they may hold views about Africa and they may articulate those views incorrectly and perhaps sometimes even unfair, when you look at what transpired in Poland and how those headlines became something else, again, there's still a responsibility on the leaders of the continent, both in civil society, in the private sector, and in government, to articulate the position of the continent on key strategic issues, on global issues, and do so consistently. Now, there's a further pain that I personally observe as we do media listening on a day-to-day basis, and you see how the stories of Africa are still even after so many years of development on the continent. You're still seeing war, you're still seeing stories about famine, you're still seeing a lot of conflict where leaders fail to come together and articulate a common purpose and a common vision, despite having, for example, a platform such as Agenda 2063 of the African Union, where we say these are our aspirations as a continent. And I think collectively as the 54 member states of the African Union, we are not articulating views about the continent that help position and reposition Africa. And lastly, and I know there are many other speakers on the platform, and so we can continue for long, but I think lastly, what you have sometimes in parts of the continent, from a media perspective at least, is that we're beginning to see an era where the most senior and most experienced journalists, because they do drive content, the most senior journalists leave the newsroom because of a lack of access to resources, and they go and join either a private sector or the public sector as spokespersons and so on. And there you find that in the newsroom today, across different on platforms, you're beginning to see and you get a sense that the experience, the more experienced people are leaving. Whereas if you compare us to the Western media, the very senior people remain in the newsroom for many, many, many years. And that helps articulate content, that helps with strategic thinking, that helps with formulating a view. So while we may have concerns about the level of commitment by media and media owners to help position the continent in a favorable light, it is also the role of business leaders, the government, the newsmakers themselves to actually also come up with a collective formula and try to do so at least in a consistent fashion, instead of looking at each other with strange eyes, blaming, with the media blaming the public or government for failure to communicate effectively, or business even, and vice versa. So I think the opportunity is there for the conversation to more shift towards what are the ideals of the continent, and how do we get everyone to speak from a common understanding without necessarily hiding the truth, without necessarily trying to polish things that are really bad on the continent, because we are really battling to speak to each other. Someone said today Sudan is now 100 days into the war or the conflict. Yet our leaders have gone to visit an environment like Ukraine, Russia, to go and try and find a solution and contribute towards peace in that area. What is it that as leaders can we do to minimize and to come up with solutions here at home before we go elsewhere? I'm going to pause there.
Thank you, President Matseba. Thank you for that. Now, you're talking of consistency, and you're talking of people leaving the discipline, going into another. We talk about content and strategic thinking. Now, I would like to bring in Mr. Bangani Mabada, who is a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg in the Department of Strategic Communication, lecturing undergraduate and postgraduate modules in communication, leadership, and change. Mr. Mabada is currently working on his PhD dissertation on the role of African indigenous communication system in transforming public relation education in South Africa. Mr. Mabada, people are leaving, they're changing, they're joining another industry. Journalists are becoming spokesperson are beginning to venture into journalism through online platforms and everyone else, because anybody with a smartphone that can take pictures and write can be a journalist. What I like about Mr. Mabada, ladies and gentlemen, he says he's very much interested in the challenges and opportunities posed by the new media in the African context. Mr. Mabada, media in Africa, what is your take?
Thank you, Professor Victor, and very interesting topic. I mean, media plays a very big role in the development of each country, you know. But when it comes to Africa as a whole, obviously, when we think of the state, you know, of the media, you know, we have to look at different dynamics. And given the African continent as it is, you know, the state of media, you'll find that it differs in each and every country. But the most important aspect that we have to look at is media freedom. When we look at media freedom, I mean, obviously, we will agree that of the more than 54 countries that we have, I mean, the way journalists are treated, or in each of these countries, it differs. If you compare the way journalists, are free to do their trade, or in South Africa, as opposed to Zimbabwe, Botswana, Swaziland, and going all the way to West African countries, it's not the same environment, so we still have a long way to go, but things are happening, and then you can also, when we look at about issues around media pluralism, it's not all countries that have, the facilities, in terms of the infrastructure, the economical muscle, to have, as many as television channels as they wish, in terms of newspapers, online platforms. All these things plays a role in different countries along the African countries. And that takes also us to the issue of media. Digital media is big, but it's not like all these countries in Africa enjoy the same penetration or equally. You find that there are other countries which are more advantaged in terms of this new technology. Now we're talking about 5G, we're talking about all different issues. And then when you look also again, issues around government influence. Government has a bigger influence in terms of spending and supporting infrastructure, and also in terms of the economical muscle of or power of each of African countries that we have. These issues plays a big role in terms of the state of media in Africa. Again, also in terms of the skills, in terms of the journalist, in terms of the journalism as a trade. In South Africa, I think kind of privilege in terms of, you find there are a lot of institutions that trains journalists, in terms of when you think of, we have a lot of investigative journalists, which also plays a very big role in terms of balancing the equation and how the government is called to account in a country. And to bring the government to account, it also brings in the issue of media regulation. I mean, if you look at the state of Africa in terms of media regulation, there are countries whereby you find that the government have got a strong hold in terms of what you can investigate, what you can report about, and what you can write about. And find that there are some draconian media laws that are in place, that restricts, in terms of how journalists can play the role. And all these issues plays a bigger role.
Okay, Mr. Mabada, just hold that thought. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're taking notes, because Mr. Mabada is a real academic. You may have heard the terminology that he has used and the things he has mentioned in his overview of the topic. But before we move over to Tanzania now, we were talking South Africa, we now want to cross the border and move over to Tanzania. Mr. President Mueng, I saw you had your hand raised.
Hi, yes, I'm sorry, I couldn't hold myself. Look, I think that we need to move from the idea that Africa is one thing. Of course, we would like Africa as a whole generally to move to a place where much of the reporting on it is positive. But we can't, and as Masiba said earlier, we can't always blame the media for the negative stuff. We tend to churn out negative stuff. So we need to have governments and peoples and businesses in Africa that churn out so much positive stuff about Africa that it becomes the stuff that dominates the media. And we can't, when you have, say, I mean, Masiba referred to the situation in Poland when the president, when they, coverage about it. When you have governments that are not fully supported by their own people, when they get in trouble with the media through negative media coverage, they can't expect their people to stand behind them. If your people don't support you, and you go there, you do something stupid, don't expect people to stand behind you on the basis that you're African. It doesn't work that way. So we need to generate a different way of looking at Africa. Of course, we are very, very diverse, as the Prophet just said. And there are places where there's media freedom, more media freedom than others. There are places where journalists still get arrested, they get disappeared, they get exiled for standing up to say the truth, or investigative journalists in Africa. There are countries in Africa like Egypt, which is known to have the biggest number of journalists in prison for writing things that government don't like. We have to talk about these things. All right. We have to talk about the fact that you have countries like Uganda that recently enacted laws, and there are others against the LGBTIQ community. We can't say that the world can't talk about stuff like that. It's hard to say, come on, guys, we just need everything positive about it. You can't script media. We need to think about what kind of media people we want, what kind of media independence we want. Media independence doesn't mean supporting nonsense in politics, because there's a lot of nonsense in African politics, and we have to call it what it is.
Great, thank you, President Moeng, for weighing in on that. Earlier on, when I had a chat with President Matsiba, he said something very profound, that we seem to have an inclination that our own continent is not doing very well. And it's about time we really raise the flag and stand up and claim the space. Now, I would like to take this conversation now to Tanzania. Invite a very special brother, Mr. Loth Makuza, who is a globally recognized, award-winning and leading communication strategist. He's a founding member and the president of the Public Relations Society of Tanzania, currently working as a chief communication strategist at Light in Mind Group. Loth has experience of working as a lead PR, public relation and communication manager in all aspects of PR, internal communication as well as stakeholder engagement. Mr. Makuza, you've had an opening on this topic. You've had the weighing in by President Moeng. From your point of view, where you sit at in Tanzania, how do you view the role of media in Africa?
Thank you so much, Mr. President Victor. I hope you can hear me very well. All right?
We can hear you very well, sir.
Exactly. Before I go directly to what you have tried to put on, I just wanted to put clear and say facts on the issues of the state of media freedom in Africa. You know, according to allafrica.com, the state of media freedom in Africa, I think there are more press freedom in Seychelles and than the most than the world's most economically powerful nations in the world. And according to the new report, it says that according to ranks, these ranks can be defined as good, satisfactory, somehow problematic. And when we talk about the difficult issues, it seems that most of the African nations fall into the problematic and the difficult groups, whereby most of the journalists and the media are working. And the Press Freedom Index in Africa shows that in 2023, Eritrea and Egypt had the least freedom of press in Africa. But on the other hand, Namibia and South Africa, I'm talking about this year now, the Namibia and South Africa obtained the highest scores on the continent, showing the satisfactory situation. But if you take this look, you can find out that Eritrea and Djibouti do not have privately owned media houses.
Oh, okay.
So to some extent, we can see how the state of media we have in Africa. And most of the media that we have in Africa are working and implementing their roles depending on the purpose of the establishment of that media. if a state-owned media, that means these medias and the journalists are working in implementing their roles in supporting what the state is implementing. But we have the privately owned media in Africa, where most of them are working and implementing the vision and the missions of their media owners. So when you talk about the freedom, the freedom of media in Africa, to some extent, most of the medias and most of the journalists do not have that freedom that you're talking about. We are entertaining, we are educating, we are reporting, partially, depending on what you have to implement your roles. But when you come, let's see the traditional and the digital media, that we have the digital media whereby the most digital age that we have, it has a massive reach to the global media, to the global read. And this comes differently from the traditional media that we have. So the traditional medias, and this cannot give us some facts and information that we have to ignore this. We have the traditional media, which is prevailing, that is doing very well, but we have the digital media, which is doing very well as well. But when you talk about the role of media in our continent, especially talking about Tanzania, we have many TV stations, radio stations, print media. The online media is coming up quick, and most of them are doing very well in shaping and informing the public. But to some extent, if you see in a communication view, they are not doing according to what they have to be supposed. These are journalists which have been trained from different universities and institutions, but they serve the purpose of their owners as media purposes. What are they? What was their main purpose for them to be established? So they are coming to serve the interests of those who are owning the media houses. So to some extent, I can see the role of media in Africa, especially in East Africa and other nations as well. Some of them are not even doing well because they are doing to serve the interests of their owners. But not
hold it right there. Hold it right there, President. President Makuza, once a president, always a president. Now, while we're out in Tanzania, you're touching on a lot of things, some of which we will get back to. I just want to cross the border, just from Tanzania, just come back down south, go to Eswatini, a country that has been marked by a whole lot of things happening, and the media is really, really doing its best to put the best out there for the public consumption. Let me invite Babe Mcinseli Vundla. This is a very young man, an astute public relations practitioner, and a journalism lecturer at Limpopo University of Creative and Technology. He's been there for over 4 years now, recently trained in Botswana and crossed all the way to Eswatini. He was a freelance journalist during the 2021 unrest in the Kingdom of Eswatini, covering political rallies and funerals of the victims of the 2021. Now, currently, he's teaching over 150 journalism students at Limpopo University of Technology. In the modules that he teaches is writing for print, introduction to journalism, and media law. Babe Mcinseli, you've heard the overviews by the previous panelists. From your perspective from Eswatini, the state of the media and how much of that is influenced by ownership and the state of the government itself. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairperson, Mr. President, actually. Once a president, always a president, as you always say. Well, it's a good afternoon to the panelists. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Victor, and good afternoon to everyone who has joined us today here on this interesting topic on media in Africa. As academia, you know, we are always interested in such topics because we get to learn and also unlearn a few things. But without a waste of time, I would like to just, you know, bring maybe to paint a picture of the Eswatini media landscape. I think most of you who are here, you have heard or you have read somewhere about the media landscape in Eswatini. And one of those most popular things that most people say about the Kingdom of Eswatini, especially in the opening paragraphs, especially in those media reports, you know, indexes on Eswatini. We know that Eswatini is one of the lowest ranked countries when it comes to media freedom, you know. So one of the lines that is popular there is that the king and the monarchy and the government, they have total control over the media in Eswatini. There's a little bit of exaggeration there because I've been, you know, we know the media ownership in Eswatini, and we can agree that there are many state-owned media outlets in Eswatini, but that doesn't mean that the government has total control over the media in Eswatini. For instance, Times of Eswatini, it is privately owned, but of course you will have people linking the editor of the Times of Eswatini, him being the speechwriter of the king again. They then say now that means the monarchy and the governments, they have now total control over Times of Eswatini. Also, we have got Channel Maswati, which is owned by Kawe Mamba. Again, now the relationship of Kawe Mamba with the monarchy will also pop by, and then people will then start saying that Kawe belongs to the royal family. So therefore, this media outlet belongs to the monarchy. And then also we also have independent news. We also have the Swaziland News, that is an online platform in Eswatini. We also have the Voice of the Nation, which is a channel in Eswatini that's privately owned. And the government doesn't have that much control over such. They do have control over the state-owned media, just like Eswatini TV, Eswatini Observer, Eswatini Broadcasting Information Service 1 and 2. Then that's where the government has total control over. And but then in these other media outlets, the government doesn't have control over even the digital platforms in the country. They are still trying to come up with bills that are, with acts that are going to ensure that the government controls you know, the digital media platform, but it is still hard. And there are also those a glimpse of hope, especially from the private media platforms like Times of Eswatini that you are seeing. So we in this country also, we simply can't run away from the fact that the constitution of the country states that we have got freedom of expression and freedom of the press. The constitution under section 24 does state that we have got freedom of expression and freedom of the press. But again, the government there is also responsible for shooting themselves on the foot. There is a constitution which is the supreme law of the land, of the country. But now we have now adopted this the saying that your freedom of expression is guaranteed by the constitution, but we don't guarantee your freedom of expression after expressing yourself. We have had journalists who have been jailed for about 15 months. That is the Swaziland Nation magazine, another privately owned magazine in the country. He was jailed alongside the human rights lawyer Tuan Masego. Most of you know him, and he is now deceased. So they were jailed for 15 months after they like questioned the powers of the then Chief Justice Ramo Dibede at that time. They were then jailed under the contempt of court. So the government then was now shooting themselves on the foot to say, now we are giving you this right. We have been given this right to express ourselves, but also you are now arresting us for expressing ourselves. And also now you are also aware that there are 2 MPs who have been arrested, and they've been using digital platforms to also express their views. You know, we have got Batete and Mtandeni Dube, the former members of parliament. They're still in jail, arrested for exercising Section 24 of the constitution of the country. So now this shows that the government has been scoring on goals, but they have guaranteed certain rights, but they're also scoring on goals. And then on the issue of the courts in the country, that is where most stakeholders, media stakeholders, have shown, you know, they've expressed their concerns over the courts, on how the courts treat the media in Eswatini. I'm yet to see the media winning a defamation of character case against any applicants in Eswatini. Once you feel like they have written a story about you, you just go to the court, and there are judicial precedents that have been set. You know, one time someone came through, a man, like an old man, came through and said, this one who is claiming to be a chief there, she like doesn't belong to that area. I am the father. That old man was like telling a journalist, and guess what? That journalist wrote that story because it was coming from someone, right? That is your duty as a journalist, to gather news from sources. Guess what? The media was taken to court. The media outlet was like taken to court, and then the journalist was also taken to court just for writing a story that has a source. Instead of taking the source for defamation of character, they are now taking the media to task.
Okay, let us hold it right there and protect you from being taken to court. You are Eswatini. Thank you so much for weighing in on that. What an insightful information that we have. Now, I would like to bring this home, and thereafter just open the floor up for questions, because I can see as a lot of people are burning and they would like to weigh in this conversation. Let me bring this home to a consumer. You know, we can talk about media and specialists and lecturers and consultants, but a person who consumes the media and a person whose job lies on the successful relationship that she has with the media. And I'm going to invite Ms. Phuthi Mothapo, who is the president of the Public Relations Institute of Southern Africa and a practitioner. She's a marketing and communication specialist at the Capricorn District Municipality in Limpopo. Ms. Mothapo, as a consumer of media, what is your experience like? You've heard the previous speaker, Loth, saying that from the research that he has conducted, it appeared that South Africa and Namibia seem to be doing things right. And we don't know what is it, but you will confirm that in terms of your relationship with the media. Do they report what they report, or do they report what they want you to tell them to do because of some other media ownership and challenges that you may have? Ms. Mothapo?
Thank you so much, Victor, and good afternoon to colleagues and everyone else. I think in terms of media, when you look as a consumer of the media information, and also having to build a good relationship with media in the communication space, one of the things that is very critical is to ensure that as much as you are working with media, you need to understand that there is, especially within the community media, there is an element of business within the community media, and also the part that is more on community-based, which a part of it is being funded by government. But when you look at how the relationship is, you do not want to step in their territory in a way that you tell them what is it that they need to report. You don't want to interfere in their reporting because they have to be independent. As much as we go to media for advertisements, for a request for a platform to speak, in other cases wherein we don't even pay for the platform, but we are only there because of the relationship that we have. The fact is, you need to ensure that you are able to get as much information as possible from the media through the relationship that you establish with the media. Because at the end of the day, you want to advise accordingly within your space of work. You don't want a situation wherein you don't see the true reflection of what is happening within the community through media, because you are influencing how they do their reporting and giving it direction. So you need to watch out very closely and guard against trying to influence how at the end of the day the media respond and even cover your institutions, and even how they report in terms of what is it that they have. Surely there will be some negativity in terms of their reporting that relates to what you do. But at the end of the day, the negative reporting that comes from the media should not be seen as attacks, but should at the same time be seen as a way of building, assisting the institutions to build brands. Hence, we need to have this particular relationship that is very conducive, and we are able to play on a level ground when we work together. So it's very much important when we look at our relationship with media in this particular regard. And the other thing is, when you look at the role that media play, especially within the local government space, there are issues that we will not be able to unravel if it was not because of the media. And in the media part, I'm talking about both the traditional media and also the digital space that is available, because there are a lot of things that get to be unraveled, and a lot of things that have, if it was not because of the digital space, will not be able to be aware of within our space and even give attention to those particular issues. So hence I'm talking about both the traditional and also the digital media. They play a huge role within the communication space. And it's important to make sure that you maintain a good relationship. And by maintaining a good relationship, we are not saying you need to fiddle in how they do things. No, there is a separation of responsibilities, and we need to respect that, so that at the end of the day, we've got a good relationship amongst ourselves, and we are able to criticize each other where is possible and build each other, because it's about the reputation of institutions, the reputation of individuals, and also the credibility of the information that gets to be disseminated by media within the space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Metapo. It's getting hot in here. It is evident that there is the whole issue around the media freedom to start with, which is the much talked about subject when it comes to media. And there's also a challenge on the public media versus the private media. I would like to go to Mr. Matsiba. I think he has left because he's got a flight to catch, but I'll throw this at President Mueng. President Mueng, countries, you said when you started, we must not look at Africa as one continent. We have 54 countries in the continent. Countries that do not comply, that seem to suppress the media freedom, and media houses that seem to be either aligned to it being private and wanting to do things their own things, or being public and being viewed otherwise. In terms of brand positioning and the reputation of those countries, what does it take for us to look at those countries and point a finger at them to say, you're wrong, you're right?
Look, in the end, politicians have power, especially in Africa, well, it's pretty much all over the place. But before I respond to your question, I want to say to the gentleman from Swaziland, Eswatini, that perhaps it's best for him to say the Constitution gives us these rights and the government takes them. When you say you, the government, are giving us these rights and you're taking them away, you're confusing things. I think it's important to separate the constitution and the government. I mean, one would like to hope that the government is an entity that comes and goes. There are successive governments in all democracies, and there's a constitution that is, in general, very constant, right? So if the constitution guarantees certain rights and the government takes those rights away, it's important to separate the two. And to blame government for not responding or respecting the constitution that is supposed to be the highest, depending in a constitutional democracy like in South Africa, of course, the constitution is the highest law is in the constitution, right? I don't know how it works in Switzerland. It's a monarchy. Probably the king can just change the constitution as he wishes. But to your question, look, of course, Africa is one continent, but Africa is also a very, very, very diverse place with 54 different countries, lots of differing political traditions and practices. We have people in Africa who have stayed in power for many, many, many years, some of them up to 40 years, who refuse to go. These people consider themselves to be the institutions. Not all African states have got independent democratic institutions. The presidents who've been there for years consider themselves to be the institutions. They instruct the different government departments, they instruct the different institutions, even including the so-called independent electoral commissions, the media. So it's very hard to say we are independent, but maybe they're independent insofar as they are not owned by government. But being independent insofar as you're not owned by government is not enough in a lot of these countries if the government or the constitution of the country doesn't allow you or guarantee you the space to express yourself. I mean, we know it's almost all throughout Africa. You say wrong things, you easily get blamed. In our own South Africa, you easily get blamed of being used by foreigners, by the white monopoly capitalists, by the imperialists, by the West, for the minute you as an African say some things that others are not happy with, it's very easy to be labeled as a betrayer, as a traitor, as a Cain, a kitchen, what I'm saying. So you get labeled all these things. I think it's important that we not just describe the problem, but we also get to a point where we say, what kind of Africa do we want from a media perspective, of course? Yeah. What do you want to see happen? And there's a body, the continental body such as the AU. Is there some way that people in the media space could come up with some form of a list of resolutions in as far as media is concerned, but other things as well, other aspects of life, and say, this is the Africa that we want. Can you guys include, I mean, we talk about Agenda 63 and all these agendas that we don't know what they really mean in terms of, key milestones. Are we getting there? What does it mean to get there? What are the key performance indicators that we're getting there? Africa is so diverse. There's no alignment on a lot of policies that need to be aligned, including media space in this regard, so that we have a sense of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable throughout Africa. So every country is doing its own thing, and that is the sad part of it.
Okay. Thank you, President Wang. Now I've got a question that I need to pose to Prof Mabada. Prof Mabada, given the history of the media, we as Africans look at the media, and sometimes we think media is only radio, print, magazine, TV, social media. There is a special art that is within us as Africans. That is the art of storytelling. It's easy, we talk about media in the big cities, and when it comes to grassroots, back to basics, communication. As an academic and as a person who's working on PhD and who love media and who love bringing Africa into a platform where we can easily communicate, what is your take on communication and media when it comes to rural communities, township, informal settlement, and rural communities?
Oh, thank you for the promotion. I'm still waiting. I'm not yet a professor.
Yeah, yes, take the blessing, receive the blessing.
Yeah, it's a blessing. That's a topic very close to my heart. When it comes to indigenous communication, but the challenge is, when it comes to Africa, and then specifically South Africa, it differs in terms of how we Africans are proud of ourselves in terms of our own, using our own languages, in terms of maybe multilingual, we're still very lacking. And it's a very painful issue, whereby you find that sometimes, a journalist goes out in the rural areas and then is trying to interview a community member there, and you find that the person is struggling to communicate in the foreign language, which is English. And then why not you let the person speak and not put the person in a corner, because what you're interested in, it's the story from the person. So let the person be free and speak in their own language, and then you as a journalist, you can interpret that afterwards to the general audience. And that comes also in terms of when it comes to the state of media in.
Sorry, excuse Mr. Mapada, you muted. Please unmute. All right, there we go.
Oh, okay. I'll have to just rewind a little bit. My concern was issues of indigenous communication.
Yeah.
It's very close to my heart, in terms of that when you look at Africa as a whole, specifically in terms of Africa, that our own indigenous language, African language, are still, not taken seriously. Though the constitution of the country, we have all 11 official language, but they're still playing second fiddle to English and Afrikaans, and it's so painful when you find a journalist going out to interview people in the rural areas, or you interviewing someone who you can see that they are not fluent in English and they cannot express themselves fully. But as a journalist, you find that you insist, and then you don't let the person say, speak in your own language free, and then I can interpret that later on. It's a very serious disadvantage in terms of how we as Africa still play this role. And in other countries, I was speaking with a colleague from Botswana who said, in terms of other countries, we find that they're proud in terms of, letting their languages, used in the mainstream media in terms of adverts and everything. They promote that. But in South Africa, you still find that in the main media, whether it's public or it's private, we still undermine our own indigenous language. We need to promote that, and that's very serious.
Thank you, Mr. Mapada, for really weighing in on this topic of communication and people being pushed to communicate in English when they are unable to express themselves. Now, I would like us to just shift gear now and move into something totally different. But before I do that, I just want to let you know some of the members have fallen off the group because of load shedding. We are live on Africa Brand Summit Facebook page, so you can follow from that platform, and this session is being recorded. You can go and check and just Google it, Africa Brand Summit 07. You'll be able to pick up on this recording. Now, we've spoken about rural communities. Now I want to bring this home, and I would like to call upon the youngest member in the panel, which is Mcinseli Vundla. Babe Mcinseli, mnaketfu. Young people are into social media. They don't read newspapers the way we do. We used to read, we read newspapers, we scan newspapers, you sit with a stack of newspapers. Come Sunday afternoon from church, you're just going through newspapers. Now, young people, bala, digital media is part of communication. Now, in the African context, a lot of people, young people in particular, have cell phones. Now, anybody with a cell phone that can take a good picture and write a passage or so is as good as a journalist. In your engagement with young people and in your lecture, and as a journalism lecturer, what is the state of digital media in Africa, and where do you think it will end up?
Thank you, Mr. Sibeko. Actually, we should be, I think, the traditional media, time to admit that the digital media has now taken over. We have what we call a citizen journalist.
We're not too sure whether you are battling with a signal or it's us, but let me switch off my camera. Maybe that will assist. Okay.
Yes. Am I audible enough now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. I say now it's time for the traditional media to admit that digital media is now taken over, and they must find a way to switch over and ensure that they also flow, they also adapt to the change. We have what we call citizen journalism that is now taken over. I've got students who were citizen journalists before they came in here to further their studies on journalism. So it is now where they get to test the journalism field, the ethics and the likes. But truth be told, everyone now has migrated to the digital platforms. Everyone now knows what happened. A minute ago, you now know an accident has taken place. In South Africa, when there was this explosion, we already knew that there was now an explosion before media outlets, the social media platforms could report about such. So the digital media platforms, they have now taken over, and now the thing that we as academics and also the social media should now do is to try and ensure that we adapt to the change, and to ensure that we also do reach out to the citizen journalists out there, people who have the smartphones, people who are also influencers, people who now post content and get the following, and also get the likes, and also get the engagement, more engagement than even the respected traditional media platforms. So it is time to reach out to those people so that we can formulate partnership, and we can also try to train them on the ethics, because my main worry on the on the digital on the high increase in the digital usage is that we are now losing the ethics of journalism. So like recently I saw a picture of a young woman who was killed in South Africa. Now they were looking for her family members in Eswatini. We just saw the entire face, and she was there, her body was lifeless, and you can tell that this is someone who is a citizen journalist who simply just saw that incident and took a picture of that thing without thinking about the emotions of the people, about ethics and what we are supposed to be doing. So as the traditional media, I think it is time to also reach out to the digital media users, instead of us shying away from them, saying that the traditional media is still the best. No, we are lying to ourselves. We have to admit that digital media platforms have now taken over, and now they've also affected what we call timeliness in the breaking of news, because it is all about breaking the story. You want to be the first one to break the story as a journalist, but then now print media especially, they have to wait for the next morning to print out so that people can go and buy the newspaper and see what was happening. Yet now with the surging of digital media platforms, it's now easy for us to know what has happened in South Africa. We now know what has happened in Eswatini. We now know what has happened in Kenya. Someone has been caught in Kenya. We don't need to wait for tomorrow morning to read the newspaper. So now it is time for also the media outlets out there to adapt and ensure that they also utilize these people, they partner with them, they also bring them in so that they can teach them on the media ethics. They also hire young blood, people who want to create change, and people who embrace what is happening currently, and they also try to ensure that they discipline in those practitioners that have been there in the newsroom for for the longest time.
Okay, Mr. Vunta, just hold it right there. Thank you so much for that input, though we battled a bit. You were too soft. I would like to read quickly Mr. Mangani's comment that says digital media is a game changer on multiple fronts. Freedom of language is expressed more there than on most media outlet. Absolutely correct. In isiZulu, there's what we call igovu. That's a person who eats they eat all by themselves and they don't share with other people. May I, at this point in time, before we go over to the next very critical question on the topic, open the platform up to our guests. If you'd like to weigh in the conversation, you may raise your hand. If not, you can just shout your name and introduce yourself and just ask a question. It can be taken by any member of the panel. Even if it's a comment, we will welcome that. We just don't want to bore you with the panelists' voices, but we also want to hear from you.
Yes, Victor, my name is Lucas.
Yeah,
Can
Dr. Shipalana, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. There is this concept of newsworthy, which is not clearly defined. What is newsworthy? Newsworthy, are we referring to something that is bad or something that is good? So basically, Africa has been portrayed as places where there is danger, whatever the case may be, and so on. So because now concentration is where things are happening, bad things are happening, then we're being portrayed on such. So I just want to anyone on the presenter, therefore, to clarify the issue of newsworthy. What are we actually referring to? Thank you so much, Evie.
Yeah, that's a very heavy question. What springs to mind is that newsworthy, that means it's making headlines. When it's making headlines, the paid newspaper is selling. And when the newspaper is selling, somebody's got a fact check. But it's not my call to answer, but that's my observation. I'll just leave this to the panelists to respond. Any taker on the question? Very interesting question. Thank you, Dr. Shipalana.
Thank you. Can I just have a take on that?
Yes, sir.
There are certain variables or criteria in terms of journalism 101, what is considered as newsworthiness. But the most notable one is the issue of it needs to be relevant, it needs to be current, it needs to be something that also or immediately within that given context. But the issue of currency, but when you look at that, in terms of when you look at the issue around developmental journalism, and then that's where the issue becomes blurry, because Dr. Spalano was talking about the issue of, negativity in terms of reporting good news versus bad news. That's the other things, because in terms of when you look at developing countries, the issue of developmental journalism is very important, but it's looked differently when it's applied to Africa, because we're telling good stories. Then the West wants the negative or bad or issues, or bad stories about Africa. So it's a very, tricky issue in terms of whose currency are you talking about. But those variables in terms of the defining characteristics or concepts of what is or currency or what is news value, or can decide in terms of what it's newsworthiness. But it's also sometimes used, in terms of gatekeeping.
Okay, thank you, sir. Newsworthy. Yeah, Now, unfortunately, what sells the newspaper is all bad news most of the time. And that's where I always have a beef with media sometimes to say, will there be ever anything regarded or referred to as responsible journalism? But anyway, I will leave that to the panelists and the rest of the members to respond to. President Mueng?
Sorry, yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, I think we forget that a lot of times editors of newspapers are let go of or fired, if you want, because they are not selling. You know, I've heard a number of times when the owners will say, dude, you're not selling enough, or the numbers have gone down, either subscription numbers, either online or in the traditional sense, have gone down. So you're not making us the money. You're not meeting or realizing shareholder value. So we forget that, especially in terms of private media, if they are businesses. They are businesses. And then we expect them to play a role that is not that doesn't pay attention to profit making, to realizing shareholder value, and that. But those are some of the things they look at, and so newsworthy. If you put stuff, and headlines are important. And I've been a columnist for many years, as you know. I would write a story, I would write an article rather, suggesting a title, but they would change the title to make it newsworthy or attractive. And they would tell you, I mean, newspapers that you see on the stand, the newspaper, the title they put on the front cover is meant to advertise, is meant to attract people to buy the newspaper. So if you're not able to sell, then so newsworthy is really there's got to be a level of commercial appeal to the story or to the content of the newspaper, but also obviously it has to be current, it has to be interesting, it has to be there's all that balance that owners or managers of newspapers of news outlets have to look at.
Mm. Hold it right there. We're talking about selling and money. That is the business. The media is in business. There's a very hot question here from Eng. I hope I'm pronouncing it proper. Agenda Mongwe. She says, since digital media is taking over and it is used worldwide, could this be the end of legacy media? Is it a good thing or bad thing since people are losing their jobs and everything is done wrong through the internet?
Well, it's really tough, isn't it? I mean, and again, I want to go back to the article. I've been in columnist for 24 for many years. I started writing for them in 2014. I wrote for other publications before, and for the first number of years, I don't remember how many now, my articles could be reached for free of charge. Just going to the now they have the little strip with for subscribers only, and I found that a lot of people who liked reading my pieces will not subscribe. So suddenly I have to copy those pieces and share them either on my LinkedIn page or on my Facebook page so that people can access them. But there was a time when they locked them and I said, but come on, stop looking. So it's really hard, even for me. I subscribe to the New York Times, to publications, but how many times can you spread yourself? So I think people are still trying to find their way through. To what extent do you make stuff available to it? Because the fact of the matter is, people have to be paid for creating that content, right? And you can't say give us access to newspapers for free. It's not fair. Somebody has to get a salary to do the investigation, to travel, to whatever they have to do in order to put the story together. So how do we get the balance? Where do we get the balance? And to what extent does that result in many people who should have access to news not having access to it because they have to pay to access it?
Sure. Thanks, President Mueng. I see Botswana is here. I see Zimbabwe is here. I see Uganda is here. I see Kenya is here. So really, you are not part of the panel, but I would love to hear from you in terms of what you think. Oh, Lesotho as well is with us. Any other hand or anybody who'd like to weigh in this conversation before we get to the two very critical questions? Okay. So, President, this is your legacy hand, I suppose, right? Okay, just checking now. Yeah, somebody. Yes, President Makuza.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on the newsworthy, and this depends on how this news benefiting the community itself. And we cannot talk about, the issue of traditional media. The traditional media cannot be killed because remember, most of the decision makers in the industry are depending from the specific publications. So print media will be there and traditional media will be prevailing while the digital media is taking over. So both will prevail and everything has to be monitored effectively. That's what I just wanted to add.
Thank you, President Makuza. So we have to mark time and leave no mark behind time. We live in the world of time and change. Yeah, it's a difficult one. Real good challenges lie ahead of us. President Mutapo, we're dealing with communities, and most of your communities are also in the rural areas. What is the municipality doing in reaching out to municipalities? What other forms of media do you use?
Thanks, Victor. There are a number of initiatives that you need to look into when you are working within a local government space. And particularly you are doing that because number one is because of lack of resources. The diverse audience that you have to feed the information, disseminate information to. And the third one also becomes the use of various methods, the issue of language also coming to play a role. So besides the normal traditional media wherein you will go for adverts, you will go for within newspapers, within radios, but you also have the digital space that is now also we are leveraging on within the communication space. But we do that very carefully because at the end of the day, there are certain things that are legislated, which we need to tread carefully looking at when we do our communications, so that we do not find ourselves wanting when it comes to certain areas. But we are forced by the law to have certain things in newspapers, like in terms of your council notices, in terms of other notices of importance within the supply chain, within the infrastructure and things like that. Then you are forced by the law to have certain notices that get to be published for a certain period of time within the media. But we do that simultaneously looking at both the social media that we normally use and also the traditional media in terms of newspapers. One of the things when you look at the space language, which is very much important within the local sphere of government, is you look at the use of indigenous languages in your communication. And to be honest, we are not doing well as communicators in that particular regard. And there's still a lot that we need to do. And when it comes to social media, it even becomes worse because you will post in an indigenous language, but the translation becomes something else. It distorts the whole meaning of whatever the message you were trying to convey, which makes it sometimes a bit difficult to use the indigenous language when you do your social media and your posting, because you guard against the dangers of having something that you did not intend, and having the consequences may be there. Because we had such an experience, and that's one of the things that has led to being a bit skeptic when it comes to the use of indigenous languages, especially on your digital space, in particular your social media posting, because when in terms of translation, they lose the meaning.
Okay.
Yes, which I think is very much important. But on the one thing that we also need to do is in terms of packaging for the media, because we need to understand both the digital and the traditional. They are not going to go away in any way, but they supplement each other and complement each other in a way. There are instances where in the digital space, takes prevalence because the news as they happen, you get to have the information. But after having that particular information, you need to have a more investigation into whatever that has been unraveled by the digital space, but more investigation that gets to be published through the traditional media. So the two need to complement each other and not see each other more of a competition, but more of complementing each other. At the end of the day, they are sources of information, and we need credibility around these particular sources of information.
Thank you, President. Just to hold it right there. Yeah, you spoke of legislation, you spoke of packaging the information, and you spoke of sources. Now, I have a very interesting comment. We're not only communicating with brothers and sisters in the African continent, but we're communicating with brothers and sisters in the African diaspora. Xolisile is based in China and says the conversation of newsworthy is really tricky in China here. Depending on whether it's from a local or foreign house, the content will be accepted based on different criteria. So very interesting. That's where you look at the role of politics, you look at where the news is from, and the source that you've just mentioned. I'll leave this up to the panelists and everyone else to respond to. But we have a very sensitive comment from Dr. Mvusi Songelwa, and she's saying, what are the ethical considerations for journalism, especially taking photographs of cultural sensitive situations, for an example, dead people, abuse, and cultural events? My panelists and any other expert in our guests can respond to this one.
Mr. Sibeko?
Yes, sir. Okay,
Yes.
it's you, Mr. Vunta. Mqinisele, it's President Mueng, then it's President Makuza. Go for it.
All right. Ethics in journalism, ethics, we need to first differentiate between ethics and the law. Ethics, those are the moral principles, the expectations of the society, and no one can also arrest you for not following ethics. You can only just lose your integrity, your honor, but laws, then they are being enforced by the law and they are forced down our throats. And if you don't follow them, then there's a fine. So now there have been philosophers who have came up with ethical principles that journalists are supposed to follow whenever they are covering sensitive situations. One of the most interesting one is the golden mean. The golden mean says that in each and every situation that you are going to face, there will always be two extremes. There is going to be the extreme, then there's going to be the deficiency. So the deficiency means that you are not going to do anything. And then the extreme, it is when you are now overdoing, you are doing to the extremes, you have reached the maximum. So those are the two extremes that are there in each and every given situation. So the golden mean says there is always the in-between. There is always this part between the two extremes that journalists are supposed to circle for. Do you understand? So This golden mean says that if you find a dead body, as a journalist, you should, the deficients will be not taking a picture of that dead person. You are saying, no, I won't take this picture. And then the extreme would be taking the picture as it is. You are not going to edit it. You are not going to blur that picture. You are just going to take it as it is, and then you are then going to post it without considering the sensitivity of that picture. So the golden mean says now you are going to take that picture and then you are going to turn it into black and white. You are going to cover the face. Now that is the best thing that is in between these two extremes that you can do in that given situation. So journalists are supposed to familiarize themselves with such principles so that they can know which one to apply in each and every given situation, and to ensure that they remain ethical and they are also covered by the ethics of journalism.
Wow, thank you, Mtinsedi Nagetfu. I've always, and I still say, I want a conversation between public relations and journalism, and we talk about responsible journalism. Now you've brought in a very interesting angle of the extreme and the deficiency. President Makuza?
Yeah, thank you so much, President Victor. So I just wanted to say, you know, ethics, doing something accurately, but remember, privacy is something very critical, and it depends in which environment and in which communities are you working with. So taking someone who is dead, the dead body, and exposing it to the community. What about the consent? Did you get the consent from the family? If there is no consent, as a journalist, it's better to respect and make sure that your ethics do not overflow, do not go beyond what the community needs. So I think journalists and the media in general has to perform and work accordingly, working parallel, by observing in which community I am, what is the consumption that the society needs to consume. So if you do not go beyond the societies and the communities regulations, then you are safe. So
Wow.
I just wanted to add on that.
Wow, thank you so much. We've got 7 minutes to go, but I would like to go over to President Mweng.
Thank you. I think the response given by the two previous speakers, and particularly Mr. Kunene, were so good that probably maybe I shouldn't add anything to them.
Yeah, I was looking for that applauding sign. I couldn't.
It was very good, really, really good.
Yeah.
But look, in the end, I think if you organize an event, the lady who asked the question wanted to also refer to cultural events. Surely, if you don't want pictures to be taken, you need to make it clear to journalists, to media present, that certain pictures shouldn't be taken. But I think also people take pictures, not all pictures that get taken necessarily get published. Sometimes they get taken so that if the evidence is denied in the future, you can use it, but not for publication. Yeah. So it really depends what you do with the pictures after you've taken them.
No, thank you so much, President Mweng. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to ask the last question to the panelists, and I would like them to weigh in. And I would like you to respond and answer both questions. How free is media in Africa? And then the next question is that, who is king or queen? Is it print? Is it radio? Is it television? Or is it digital platforms? As you wrap up answering these questions, please substantiate. I'll start with Prof. Mr. Bangani. How free is media in Africa? And in all the various medias that we have, who is king? Is it print? Is it radio? Is it TV? Is it digital platforms?
Thank you, Press. Thank you. The issue around media freedom, I think I'll be just straight to the point, but when looking at research and report in terms of Reporters Without Borders, I think the 2019 report, they said that they stated that the high media, in terms of high media freedom, I think countries that were found to be high in media freedom, it was Ghana, Cape Verde, Namibia, and South Africa. And then those with restricted media freedom, it was Djibouti, Eritrea, Equatorial Guinea, and Sudan in terms of media freedom. But generally, when we look at that, there are some truth in that, in terms of how these countries have fared. But of course, there is still room for improvement in terms of all these countries. And then when it comes to the issue of which is king and which is queen, for me, radio will always take number one. Radio will always be the best, in terms of, language, in terms of reach, in terms of whatever you're doing, less restrictions and everything, we can, development will always be there, in terms of media development, but radio is going to stand the test of time until then because of those less restrictions.
Thank you, sir. Let's move over to Mr. President Makuza. Okay, how free is media in Africa, and who is king between these mediums?
In a very serious note and in a very briefly, that I just wanted to say, I don't have a direct answer, but the freedom of media in Africa is affected by affiliated media from Western world. So in order to build and create a free media in Africa, it's better at least more than 95% of media in Africa to be owned by Africans themselves, so that our journey can stay there. But the affiliated media, especially from Western Africa, degrades and they distract the freedom of media in Africa. And who is the king? I can say the print media is still the king, because I can see here the sector-specific publications are read by the industry decision makers, and most of people are still relying on the print media. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. I love reading. I just love the smell of ink. You can have your social media and everything else, but I just want to read the newspaper. I want to read the book. Let's move over to Babe Mkunse, Eswatini. How free is media in Africa? And then who is king? Print, radio, TV, digital platforms.
All right, that is a very tricky question. We can say, some parameters have like placed South Africa as one of those countries with media freedom, but if we talk about media freedom, that means you are also free from advertisers. So now we say it is 100% free. So it is very tricky and it is so hard to answer. But of course, it is being affected. Media freedom is being affected by the political landscape. In other countries whereby they are authoritarian states, then those countries, then they are also suffering. But even those countries that have been given, the nod in terms of being enjoying more freedom of the press, but then there are also some elements of control that comes with the people who have got the money, people who advertise. So that is something that we'll never ever be able to to understand. So Mr. Sibeko, I hope you will understand. I can't answer that question because freedom to me, it's it's being affected by many factors. So we will always have this debate on what determines free media. But then, of course, some countries are better than others. They're being not controlled by political parties or by political superiors, but they are being controlled by advertisers. But in other countries, it is those who are censoring from the political landscape. That is when then things become so bad for those media platforms. And then on who is king and who is the queen, I will go with the print media being the first one, followed by television. And then now there's a new kid on the block. Radio has to do much to catch up, but then, of course, they are still there. But then digital media, it is gunning for all those big guns that I've mentioned, because that is where now you can be able to have multimedia, you can have your television, you can have your radio, you can access everything through the internet. So it is the one that I see, in the near future taking the leading role in everything. But for now, print media alongside television, they are the ones who are leading well, according to me. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. One of the guests said digital media is a game changer. Madam Motapo, the only rose among the thorns. Your parting shot. How free is the media, and who is king and who is queen?
Look, to say it's a difficult one to answer. Like my colleagues have said, it's sometimes where you get your resources or who holds the purse at the moment in time, or say determines the game and give direction. So it's a bit difficult to say who in particular is the media free. It will depend at the point in time that we enter this particular discussion. So I will not say the media is totally free. It's influenced some way, somehow, by the issues of resources. That does, and even the political landscape is true. And who is king? Yeah, it's also a bit difficult, but from where I stand is because of the environment that we are serving within the local space. The local community radio is the ones that we are utilizing more. Within our space, I think they play a huge role, but in overall, they are not king, they are not queen, but within our small space, they play a huge role. But digital media is a new kid on the block, and we need to understand and appreciate this particular kit, but that is somewhere going towards being king, queen, because part of the information that we get emanates from this particular new kit in the block, who is paving the way. So I don't have a concrete answer to say this one is king, this one is queen.
Wow.
It depends.
Thank you so much, Madam. Well put. President Mueng, just your parting shot.
Yeah, I think digital is king, content is queen.
Oh, yeah. Did you hear that? Please say that again.
Digital is king, content is queen.
Aha.
Yeah,
I love
but
it.
I want to respond to there's this perception that the complexion of the person owning the media will determine whether the media is pro-Africa or not. We make that mistake in South Africa. When there are many independent media publications in South Africa that are owned, or maybe by whoever owns them, but that are managed as editors, chief editors, by Black people. And when those people say things that the politicians don't like, then they get accused of being controlled and all that. But I think there's this concept that Black people cannot be independent. Black people have to think in a particular way. I can still be a Black owner of media and still criticize the status quo, and we have to accept that. So don't think that because media is owned by Black people, it's going to say the things that you want to say as Black people. It's nonsense.
Sure. Thank you so much, President Mueng. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our program, but I want to share something with you. we don't just do these programs as talk shop. They are a build up to what's our main annual summit, which we said last month. We're hoping to host it in Lusaka. The conversation is still on, but what I like about this, President Wing, is that there is something that comes out of these programs. We don't just talk, we action. From one of the previous conversations we had, we actioned something that we're going to do in October to talk about the rural health. And we have a very special colleague of mine, Lindelwa Sikolo Kekelame, whom we're working with, we partnered with from the Cancer Association. Now, with this particular conversation we've had today, there is a recommendation that says, should I say from who? But the recommendation says to suggest that we, Africa Brand Summit, working in partnership with the national and regional media organizations throughout Africa, lead a process to draft a charter of resolutions on needed create a better space for the media to operate around the continent. Such a charter could be delivered to the African Union for debate and hopefully an enactment or domestication into national legislation. You see, we were not just talking. So you can elaborate on that, President Wing.
Yeah, I think, we're very good in Africa at talking and having clever, smart conversations. And then we go home, we feel good about ourselves. We come back a year later, we start off where we left off. I think it's, as in the tradition of the Africa Brand Summit, it's important that we have decisions on key things that we're not lawmakers, we don't make policy, but we can upscale certain things, so we can action some things and make them aware, bring them to the awareness of the people who make policy, who make laws. And I think if we said, okay, there's a discussion to be had about media freedom in Africa, how would we work with the National Editors Forum in South Africa and other similar organizations elsewhere around the continent to come up with some charter that gets delivered to the lawmakers in Ethiopia, Africa, the AU, say, look, guys, we are very worried, we're very concerned about the state of media freedom in Africa and all other related matters. And then this thing gets delivered to them. Then that way we would have played our part. We kick the ball to their side, lawmakers, policymakers, and see what happens. Because then otherwise we're going to come back here next year, feel good about saying very clever things, but nothing gets done about them.
Thank you so much, President Wing. So this is it. So for those of you that would like to have a look at this program later on, you're more than welcome to go search on YouTube. By tonight, this program will be on YouTube. Just go into your YouTube and search for Africa Brand Summit, Media in Africa. You'll be able to pick up the conversation. If not, you can still go to your Africa Brand Summit Facebook page where you will see the broadcast live. Thank you for your time. For next month, we would like to change the arrangement. It's Women's Month in South Africa. I know it's not Women's Month in the rest of the continent, but there's a concern around women and leadership and the C-suite. That sometimes we speak of the glass ceiling, that most women are unable to get it to become CEOs and board directors. So there is this glass ceiling that we must break. So there's a lady that's written a very interesting book, which I wouldn't like to reveal now. And I'll have a conversation with my colleagues at the office, President Wing. We'll talk about it for next month, the last Tuesday of every month at 2 o'clock. That is when we host the Africa Brand Summit webinars. So let us talk about women leadership and the C-suite. Now, the C-suite is you becoming a chief operations officer, a chief executive officer, a chief financial officer. What is it? What stops you? What challenges do you face? How can you really tap into that space? And what do you need? What type sort of support you need from other powerful women out there? And what can we do as responsible men, President Wing, to assist and mentor, coach you to be at that level, and one day you'll also become a president like me and Mr. Wing.
Yeah, and issues of harassment, I think, are important as well.
Yeah. Bullying,
bullying and
bullying.
yeah.
Okay, so next month, the last Tuesday of next month, it's Women's Month. We will be talking women and leadership in Africa. And then we'll you watch the space. We'll send in the notices and the save the date and the teasers. From me to you, with love and all, thank you so much. It's been a very interesting afternoon. And to the panelists, we appreciate you. Please do not give up on us. We've always kept you around. Now, I want to mark the register, and I know this is a bit, sometimes it rubs people the wrong way. I want to mark the register. May I ask everybody, please, I love this, to switch on your cameras. We want to see your pretty faces. And I saw a very special friend joining right now. Can we all switch on our cameras? And
Victor, I hope I'm visible today.
Oh, yay! Dr. Shipalani. Okay.
There you go.
Hafsa has been part of the conversation, but she's been busy. And while she's listening, she's working and she's preparing meals and lunch and, playing mommy.
I see there's Mr. Sputnik Ratao, the waterman. He speaks well on water issues there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to be known as a waterman, but.
Wow. Okay. I'm waiting for cameras to switch on. Other people are running away. President Motapo, please switch on your camera. I want to mark the register. Mkwegazwa Nyakbona, I won't call you by name. The Queen Mother Nyakbona, I won't call you by name. Some of them are shy. Okay. All right. We'll mark the register with those that are here. This is how I do it. I go in and I snap this one and I go there and I've marked the register. Yay! Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Angela.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.